I will be presenting today. This is a scoping review, and the title of the review is Mental Health of Human Trafficking Survivors, Scoping Review. To set the context, I will be starting by sharing some facts about human trafficking. These are, according to an ILO report of 2017, 40.3 million individuals are being trafficked globally. According to another a report of 2020, which is the Trafficking in Person report, that says like around 24.9 million people across the world are currently victims of forced labor. And each year, approximately over 5,000 new cases of human trafficking get added to IOM database. They have a separate database for maintaining human trafficking cases. And several studies, those have mentioned about some of the common mental health issues trafficking survivors experience. Those are depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorders. And studies also say that there is very limited research on mental health consequences of human trafficking. The scoping review I conducted, so the purpose of this scoping review is to provide an overview of the current state of the literature on mental health of trafficking survivors and to identify gaps. This scoping review followed the methodological framework defined by Arske and O'Malley, and it was guided by research question, and that is what is known from the existing literature about the mental health of trafficking. So for searching literature articles, I searched article in two databases. One is PsychoInfo, another is SocioIndex, and I also searched articles from Google Scholar. The search generated total 61 articles. After examining those articles by titles and abstracts, and after deleting like duplicates and those are not relevant, there were total 21 articles out of those 61 for more in-depth review. Since in several articles there were repeated reference to some 5 articles, I Google search to get those, and I also added those for my in-depth review. So I reviewed total 25 based on the inclusion and exclusion criteria of this scoping review, and finally I got 10 articles for this review. And these are the inclusion and exclusion criteria of the scoping review. Some of them are like any study that reported mental health of trafficking survivors, published in English, conducted on trafficking survivors. Studies were not restricted to geographical settings, and no dissertation and book chapters were selected for this review due to time and resource limitation. This is a table which shows which articles I reviewed, and these are the location where those studies were conducted, and these are the sample sizes, and these are the types of the studies. So here we can say there was only one mixed method study, rest of the 9 were quantitative. So these are some key findings from the scoping review. The first one is a majority of human trafficking researches has been conducted on female survivors of trafficking, and there is very little is known about other group of trafficking survivors, like the consequences of mental health on other groups of trafficking survivors. With lack of social support and unmet social needs, such as unemployment, lack of money, lack of with lack of money. Homelessness or lack of accommodation is also an independent risk factors of mental health issues among trafficking survivors. Another key finding is comparative research on mental health of different groups of trafficking survivors is a notable gap in human trafficking literature. And some of the implications of this review are that findings of this review can serve to identify direction for future research, can help to theory development and practice focused on the mental health of trafficking survivors. So with that, my presentation is over, but I have some discussion questions. My first discussion question is, what are your thoughts about, like, how important is mental health of trafficking survivors for their reintegration into the society? Or if you have any comments on the review or anything, any thoughts or anything that you want to share?
Great job, Fahmida. I'm looking at kind of some of the findings, and I guess, was there anything that you saw that was really surprising to you, or something that maybe stuck out that you weren't expecting?
Yeah, so when I reviewed those articles, I have seen like differential impacts of mental health on different groups of trafficking survivors, like impacts of physical and sexual violence. I mean, those trafficking survivors, if they are female, when they experience physical and sexual violence, its mental health impact on them was like, they reported about like depression, anxiety, and PTSD. But when male trafficking survivors who experience physical violence and threat of harm, they only reported about PTSD. So there are those kind of like differences, but there are very little research which actually looked into that piece.
Hi, Fahmida. That was really interesting. Thank you. I was just wondering about if you could say something about the approaches in different countries and contexts, because the list of articles that you put up, it seemed like the studies had taken place with a focus on lots of different places geographically. And I was just wondering if you could say something about that, really, about different approaches and relative effectiveness.
So what I can remember from that review is that when, I mean, based on like a location, when there is a multiple location, then there was like they use some different statistical methods, maybe multi-level or cluster analysis. So I have seen differences in approach of using statistical methods to measure mental health consequences on trafficking survivors. This was one thing that I noticed. And but in most of the studies, trafficking survivors, like the mental health issue they are experiencing, reported about, it was mostly like anxiety, depression, and PTSD.
And just as a quick follow-up, I just wondered if there's any like discussion of obstacles in terms of definitions or the labeling of various mental health types of mental health issue across different, so where people have worked across different geographical contexts, was there issues in sort of identifying or in participants in those programs being able to correlate their experience with the definitions being used?
So I understand that I mean, in terms of context, trafficking it varies. I mean, from location to location, how it will be defined. But the studies I reviewed, I did not notice anything like that, like any differences in definition of like defining mental health consequences or human trafficking.
Okay, thank you.
So I have one more question, that is, one of the study that mentioned that to address the needs of mental health of human trafficking, longitudinal research can be really helpful. So I would like to know your thoughts around that. What do you think? Can this approach be a helpful research method to address or to identify the mental health needs of human trafficking survivors?
I had made a reference earlier to the butterfly longitudinal research project, and that was a 10-year study with 128 participants, primarily female. But some of the interesting data that came out of that longitudinal study was things like after 3 years, the ethnicity of the person seemed to change. But actually what was going on was that there was enough trust built between the person that was asking the questions and the survivor to say, no, my nationality is not just this, but it's something else, which was a group of people that were hated in the country where she lived. So she didn't identify as that. And I think, and another thing that came out was the push and the pressure that people in certain countries feel to provide for their families, that us, not necessarily in the West, feel that same kind of pressure. So I think that the longitudinal study, it helps to build relationships. It helps to get down to really some of the nitty-gritty challenges that people face. And then also what we talked about a little bit earlier about the stigmatization. It helps, it gives survivors a chance to experience that, which they will. And then also to report back to people that are doing the questioning or people that are serving them, that this is what this is like. And I think it's particularly critical for boys who tend to take longer to self-reveal than girls do, or men versus women.
Yeah, so what you just have mentioned, like that boys or men take sometimes to reveal about their feelings and about what they experience. I have also, I can remember that maybe in one article it was mentioned, and when I saw those differential impact of mental health consequences on different groups of trafficking survivors, that points also came up in my mind. Maybe they did not open up that way when the survey or the studies were conducted. And my opinion also kind of similar, like since longitudinal studies like allows to see the changes or differences over the time. So I think this is a good research approach to address the mental health needs of human trafficking. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Anyone wants to share their thoughts about this?
So Tenshi has a question. Tenshi, do you also want to just maybe
Yeah.
unmute and say it? Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry. I was thinking about this as you were speaking, so I just typed in the chat. But do you think that's the reason why there are less studies on boys than girls? Is it because like they take longer time to reveal that information about their experience with the trafficking? Or do you think it's more like, you know, scholarly attention kind of issue that the people are more interested in girls, like in terms of the like publication and academic interest? But I was just curious what you would think about this.
So I think this is not the case that boys take time to reveal. I think since women and children are is a big group which experience trafficking more frequently than men, but men also like experience human trafficking. Women and children, they mostly experience sexual exploitation, also labor trafficking, but male victims of trafficking are mostly labor trafficking victims. And when maybe trafficking, I'm not sure though, it's just my assumption, that when trafficking research started, they mainly focused on female and children. And now more research is being conducted on labor trafficking survivors. So maybe in future we will see more research on male trafficking survivors as well.
Thank you for answering.
Thank you.
Interesting research. Thank you.
Thank you.